this case is really something else. And I just want to pull back and provide more context again. So if we're talking about this previous controversy, which unfolded, its original seeds were like 2019, and the University of North Texas case really gets rolling in 2020 and 2021. That was, again, put yourself back in that context. There was a lot of frenzy and a lot of anger. Now, this case is born out of the frenzy and anger over library books in schools. And we have talked about this quite a bit on this podcast, the frenzy around library books. And most of this has focused on when can a school board, or most of the controversy has been more local and focusing on when can school boards yank books from shelves. And the answer to that question is surprisingly vague. There is a Supreme Court case called Pico that essentially says, well, yeah, I mean, school boards have lots of discretion, but it's not unlimited. For example, you couldn't take every Republican book off the shelves or every book by a Black author, and that there is this sort of right to receive information that exists. But we're not saying you can't curate your collection. We're just saying there's guardrails. And that's most of the controversies. This is not that. This is something very different. This is saying, okay, publishers, you have to rate your book, and without real clear guidelines as to how you're going to rate it. And then if we don't like the rating, we'll re-rate it for you. And then the standards here for how this is all implemented are deeply confusing. And I'm going to, there's a few times, David, when I just feel like to analyze a case, I'd really just like to read out loud a long piece, but I'm not going to do that. But there's a tremendous Substack about this decision by Chris Geidner, and we'll put that in the show notes. And what he does is he really pulls out some of the key elements here. So here you had a law that was about to go into, that was about to start being enforced. And here's a interesting part of the opinion. So the court says, generally, the government was confused and unaware of how the law would actually function in practice, even though the hearing was mere days before it would go into effect. There are approximately 40 instances during the August 18th hearing where the government either did not know how the law would function or did not have an answer as to what the effects of certain provisions were. And then he points out a couple of salient examples. So, for example, the judge says, on enforcement, who would enforce the law? Answer, that's a good question. A good question that I don't know that anybody has thought that through yet. Okay. On when and why the Texas Education Agency would change ratings, quote, I haven't thought that through yet. I think this is still being worked out because this is a new bill. On whether there is no appeal from the TEA's ratings changes. I believe that's correct, Your Honor. I haven't thought that through, but I do believe that's correct. On whether booksellers could seek relief if they're harmed under the law. Well, Your Honor, maybe the answer is they can't. Okay, there's nothing super legally interesting here, because if you're walking in with answers like this, just pro tip for young lawyers, you're losing. How would we enforce it? I don't know. Standards, not so sure. Right to challenge, don't really know. You're just, and I'm not faulting the lawyers, because if the law is that poorly drafted, they've got to work with what they've got to work with. But again, here's the theme, David. In the middle of these panics, state entities either do things like University of North Texas, or state legislatures pass things like this law that may as well have been written in crayon. It's so bad. And then when you challenge it, like if you're someone who's saying on social media, or you're writing a piece saying, whoa, wait a minute, this is a bad law. The answer is, oh, you must really not care about protecting kids from porn. Like, what? Wait a minute. No, actually, I really care about the First Amendment, and I do care about protecting kids from porn. How do we handle both of these things? And then they don't care. They just plow through and they pass it. And then the answer is, see you in court. you're going to have to learn the hard way. And it's really frustrating how much we've seen this play out over the last 2, 3, 4 years.